Haha! Oh boy. Okay, a bit more of a deviation from the book in this one, and now I have to debate whether or not they've acknowledged that Percy's papa might be a sexual predator. I am so glad I came out of retirement for this. An almost inconceivably huge thank you to my patrons for making what I do possible, especially the Big Three, April Mack, Shelby Holtz, and Curtis Charles Jr. Consider joining their ranks to get access to new exclusive content every month, including episodes of Lost in Adaptation that can't be posted on YouTube for various reasons. Hello mortals, and welcome back to Lost in Adaptation, the show about comparing adaptations to the books they're based on, and the semi-live reaction to Disney's new Percy Jackson series. We're on to episode 3, we visit the Garden Gnome Emporium. Apologies that, ironically, after my complaints last week, I am now the one with the toned-down performance. Would you believe it, Dom and I both lost our voices at the same time. What are the odds, right? Anyway, let's talk adaptation. Before he can start his quest in earnest, Percy has to visit the somewhat crispy Oracle who lives in the camp's big house attic. The Oracle in question being a green mist that spills from the mouth of a long-dead human woman's corpse. For some reason it takes the form of Percy's stepfather Gabe and delivers a word-for-word from the book prophecy about going west to get the thing, being betrayed by a friend, and failing to rescue his mother. Grover and Annabeth explain to Percy that a large pine tree used to be their friend Thalia, who, upon their arrival in camp 7 years before, hadn't quite made it over the line and had been transformed by her father Zeus to save her from death, and she's now a part of the barrier that keeps monsters out of camp. Incidentally, there has been some talk that show Percy isn't as sassy as his book counterpart, but even written form Percy would have been impressed by this sick burn.
She fought valiantly, and she met a hero's fate.
She met a pinecone's fate.
Luke offers Percy flying shoes as a last-minute parting gift that are passed on to Grover instead for Greek pantheon political reasons. Attempting to travel across the country on a bus, the gang are intercepted by a reconstituted Mrs. Dodds and her two Fury sisters, forcing a confrontation and a hasty escape. The trio stumble into Auntie M's emporium of very realistic-looking statues, including one that looks a lot like Grover's Uncle Ferdinand, and accept the shrouded hostess's offer of food, before having to battle her to the death as, what do you know, she's Medusa, and intent on adding them to her collection. Percy eventually decapitates her with his magic sword Riptide, and to make sure that her head is disposed of properly, and as a fuck you to the gods that he's becoming increasingly resentful towards, he has it mailed to Mount Olympus with his compliments. BT dubs, while this isn't really relevant to anything I'm talking about, gosh, that was a very Lord of the Rings reminiscent shot. I wonder if that was intentional. Hello my beautiful watchers, forgive the intrusion, I felt I should film this bit out of character to avoid the comedy value of Terence distracting from what I have to say. I touched upon this in the last episode, specifically in regards to Annabeth, but I wanted to expand on it. It's pretty clear that the casting of this series prioritized diversity, inclusivity, and talent over accuracy to a character's physical description from the book, pretty much across the board. This includes Percy, by the way. Now, granted, despite what his Wikipedia page says, him having a Mediterranean complexion isn't something that I could verify with a quote from the book, leading me to believe it's a bit of a Mandela effect, but he is described as being black-haired, Roman-looking, and well, I mean, we know he's half Greek. So yes, we can all acknowledge that the cast of this show are very often inaccurate to the source material. Whether you think it's a good thing that Riordan decided to use this second chance to correct writing about an almost exclusively white story so wildly underrepresented groups can see themselves in their heroes too, or it just makes you want to bitch about wokeness, is up to you. Carry on, Terence. Thank you. Once again, there's a bunch of relatively inconsequential differences to the source material that I'll mention just for the sake of thoroughness. Now that the trio have left camp, I can officially say that they skipped over the Hellhound attack. Right after the Capture the Flag game, Percy was supposed to be set upon by a pup of the underworld. It is a bit of a shame because it was the first hint that someone inside Camp Half-Blood was a traitor, as monsters like that wouldn't have been able to cross the barrier unless summoned from the inside or invited in. And it was one of the first examples in the books that Chiron was was a badass on the battlefield as well as an intellectual. Horseman put like 50 arrows in the thing in 3 seconds flat. The show skips over a rather ominous moment during the pit stop on the bus where Percy sees the three fates, taking the form of old ladies knitting large socks. They make eye contact with him before snipping a thread, an event in mythology portending someone's doom. Speaking of, they seem to be quietly ignoring Book Percy constantly having slightly prophetic, varying levels of abstract dreams about Zeus and Poseidon fighting, and a creepy voice from the depths of Tartarus low-key trying to tempt him to the dark side. They make Percy picking 2 companions to go with him more of an official camp policy, instead of them just being his 2 closest friends who made it clear that they were coming along for their own reasons. Percy's reasoning for choosing Annabeth is made a little darker too. Officially, it was because he wanted someone who would do whatever it took to complete the quest, even if that meant sacrificing him, but it's revealed at the end of the episode to be because the prophecy about a friend betraying him got under his skin, so he wanted someone he didn't consider a friend along. I am glad that Show Percy clarified that he invited Grover over any of the potentially more combat proficient half-bloods because Grover was the one person that he refused to accept would ever betray him, because the editing seemed to suggest that he was suspicious of him too, and I really didn't want this to become yet another dark story about a bunch of arseholes who never trust each other. Grover's poor panpipe playing is replaced with poorly sung, poorly written, inspirational songs, presumably for the sake of the joke at the end where Percy tries to sing it after they've all been brought together by their shared murder. They seem to be fudging the backstories just a little, so the Furies were the monsters that would have killed Thalia if she hadn't gotten all triified, leading to a more personal bad blood between them and Annabeth, something they capitalized on later in the episode when they have a pre-tense fight negotiation on the bus. Mildly disappointingly, said fight on the bus is pretty toned down in the show. Annabeth shanks one of the sisters and then they bail over as quickly as it began, as opposed to the wild high-speed affair of the book that culminated in Percy intentionally crashing them and the fortunately empty of mortals bus exploding. The discovery of Uncle Ferdinand is taken a little more seriously this time around. Originally it's played almost for laughs, and Grover took a, well, he knew the risks attitude towards his family member's death. Keep in mind that in the books it's established that no satyr has ever returned from a quest to find their missing god Pan, so he's been presumed dead for quite a while now. It's worth noting that Pan and Grover's ultimate goal to become a seeker of him still hasn't been mentioned in the series. There is still time, but we've definitely gone past when it was discussed in the book. The real changes to the episode start when they reach Auntie M's place and Annabeth immediately clocks her as Medusa, instead of the 3 of them walking right into her trap, ignoring Grover's half-hearted warnings that the place smelled like monsters. In Percy's defense, as he himself points out in the book, they were starving and really sleep-deprived, so the obvious was a little harder to notice than usual. They have a little snacky snack, then Medusa suggests they pose for a photo before taking off her burqa and attempting to petrify them. At Annabeth's behest, Percy uses a shiny garden ornament to follow in his namesake's footsteps and aim his head-liberating sword swing using a reflection as guidance. In the show, things go down a little differently. Mrs. Dodds, aka Electo, manages to track them to the Gnome Emporium, but doesn't dare approach Medusa, who, with no pretense as to her identity, invites them inside. BT dubs, the fact that Medusa is very attractive is also a far cry from the book. Percy is utterly horrified that anyone could be that ugly when he sees her reflection in his orb. So, it has been pointed out in modern discussions of the original Perseus and Medusa that every version of the fable that involves Medusa starting life as a beautiful woman then being transformed into a hideous monster was pretty fucking unfair to Medusa. At best, Poseidon seduced her and convinced her to bang in Athena's temple, so why the heck was Medusa the one being so horrifyingly punished? And she was, quite frankly, minding her own damn business when Perseus rocked up to chop her head off in her sleep. Riordan has clearly been influenced by this, or come to the same conclusion after the book was written, because apparently he personally requested the Disney series Medusa reflect this. He also wanted to draw attention to the way that Medusa's story mirrors Percy's mother's, in as far as she was, to a certain extent, also abandoned to face the consequences of their union alone by her godly lover. So, instead of rambling about her lost sisters and her statue-selling business, Show Medusa gives the trio a pretty frank talk about their parents and how they could be utter dicks without any consequences sometimes, something that Percy seems to take to heart, while Annabeth seems pretty clear not to examine too closely. However, Medusa loses the moral high ground moments later when she tries to get Percy to turn on his friends Olympians, and moves straight to trying to 420 them the second he doesn't take her up on it. The battle also goes down slightly differently, as it takes place in a massive underground lair that Medusa apparently has, and instead of using a reflection to give her the old choppity chop, Annabeth puts her hat of invisibility on her so they can't see her face. I must confess, this doesn't make complete sense to me, because instead of not being able to see her because his eyes are closed, Percy now can't see her because she's invisible. So either way, the little man's making a completely blind swing, but I guess it's at least more original than doing the same thing as Perseus. Less originally, Percy then reenacts the Clash of the Titans and uses the head to re-kill his former algebra teacher. There's then a short-lived suggestion that they leave the helm on her head and bury it when they leave to keep it from harming anyone else, which would have been an utterly nonsensical, utter waste of a powerful magical object that I suspect was only in the script to add some contrived extra tension between Percy and Annabeth that Grover could dispel almost immediately. And now onto the more concerning aspect of this episode. In one famous version of the Medusa myth, and thanks to OSP Red, I was able to confirm that this has to be the one that Riordan has been drawing from, the Forbidden Temple coupling between her and Poseidon was not a consensual act, making Poseidon a complete evil monster and Athena a victim-blaming piece of shit. Now, Uncle Rick was obviously not going to include that in a children's adventure book, so Annabeth describes a perfectly consensual relationship between them that just happened to consummate in the wrong place. Now, it mostly appears that this show is following in the Lighting Theif's footsteps regarding this, but there is now some wording that I at least found distressingly ambiguous.
So you're not a monster, what are you then?
A survivor.
That is a commonly used term for someone who has suffered domestic or sexual abuse. Again, it seems unlikely that Disney decided to make one of the protagonists of their series a confirmed sex offender, especially because it looks like they chose to tone down Smelly Gabe's domestic violence to avoid triggering their audience, but the possibility is just there enough to make me very uncomfortable. But to end on a more positive note, the show also includes a scene of Hermes delivering Medusa's head to Olympus, presumably to establish that it's on top of the Empire State Building without having to put that in the dialogue, and because if you've got Lin-Manuel Miranda, you want to get the most out of having Lin-Manuel Miranda. Final thoughts. So definitely more off-book than the first two episodes, but not necessarily in a way that derails the main plot. Riordan's style of writing involves a lot of mini-quest digressions for the leads that, while entertaining, don't always tie into each other, which actually gives the showrunners more wiggle room to play around with the individual chapters without larger consequences. Still waiting to find out if this Grover has a hidden dark side, but that's okay, you have to pay some stuff out. And what can I say, it's still a very visually pleasing show. Props to them for going the extra mile to make everything look so authentic. Thank you for joining me, mortals. If you're new here and would like to stick around for the rest of the series, don't forget to run that subscribe button through with your celestial bronze. If you missed it or would like to remind yourself of the events of the first episode of the series, you can watch it right here. And when the next episode is available, it will appear right here. Terrence out.